Grandpa left me something before he died. Dad laughed and threw it in the trash. I secretly went to the bank and couldn't believe what was inside that account. My grandfather never had much to say. He was a quiet man who woke up before sunrise, drank his tea standing at the kitchen window, and went to work without complaint. He worked at the same factory for 31 years. Never got promoted. Never asked for much. But every single week, without fail, he put something aside. I did not know this when he was alive. I found out the day my father threw his last gift in the trash. I was 17 when my grandfather passed. He died on a Tuesday morning in the same bed he had slept in for 40 years. Nothing dramatic. He just did not wake up. The doctor said his heart had simply worn out. I believed that. He had given a lot of it away over the years. At the funeral, people said the usual things. Good man. Hard-working. Never bothered anyone. My father nodded and shook hands and accepted condolences with the practiced ease of someone who had not visited his own father in over 2 years. I stood beside him and said nothing. There was nothing to say. A week after the funeral, a letter arrived at our house. It was addressed to me. My name, written in my grandfather's handwriting, slow and careful, the way he did everything. Inside was a small brown envelope and a single folded piece of paper. The paper said only this: "For you. You always listened. Love, Grandpa." Inside the envelope was a passbook. Old, worn at the corners, the kind banks do not issue anymore. I opened it. There were decades of small deposits listed inside. $10, $20, sometimes just $5. Week after week, year after year. I stood in the hallway and turned the pages slowly, running my finger down the columns of numbers, and I felt something tighten in my chest. My father walked in while I was still standing there. He looked at what I was holding. I handed it to him without thinking. He flipped through it the way you flip through a magazine at a doctor's office, quickly, without interest. Then he made a sound that I will never forget. A short laugh. Not a warm laugh. The kind that means something is beneath consideration. "This is a joke," he said. He looked at the total balance on the last page, shook his head, and dropped the passbook on the kitchen counter. "Your grandfather saved his whole life, and this is what he had to show for it." He pushed it toward the edge of the counter as he walked past. It fell into the open trash can below. He kept walking. He did not look back. I stood there for a moment. Then I reached into the trash, picked up the passbook, wiped it on my sleeve, and put it in my pocket. My father was already in the next room. I do not think he even noticed. That night I sat on my bed and opened the passbook again. I looked at the first deposit. It was dated 3 months after I was born. I looked at the last one. It was made 6 weeks before my grandfather died. 30 years of deposits. Never missed a single month. I sat with that for a long time. The next morning, I went to the bank. I was 17, I had never been inside a bank alone before, and I did not know what I was doing. I walked up to the counter and told the woman there that my grandfather had passed away, and that he had left me this passbook, and I did not know what to do. She looked at the book, looked at me, and asked me to wait. A few minutes later, a man came out from the back. He was the branch manager. He introduced himself, shook my hand, and asked me to sit down in his office. I sat across from him at his desk, the passbook in my hands, and he opened his computer and typed for a moment. Then he stopped typing. He looked at his screen. Then he looked at me. He asked me to confirm my name and date of birth. I did. He typed again. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands on the desk and looked at me with an expression I could not immediately read. "Your grandfather opened this account the year you were born," he said. "He listed you as the sole beneficiary." He paused. "Are you aware of the current balance?" I told him I had seen the passbook. I mentioned the number I had seen on the last page. The manager shook his head slowly. "That passbook is outdated," he said. It was not updated after the account was moved to our new system 8 years ago. He turned his computer screen toward me. I looked at the number on the screen. I did not understand it at first. I read it again. My grandfather had been putting small amounts away every single month for 30 years, and those amounts had been growing in a savings account with compound interest for 3 decades. What had looked like a modest sum in the old passbook had become something else entirely. Something my 17-year-old brain could not immediately process. I looked up at the manager. He was watching me quietly. "This is mine," I said. "It is yours," he said. "It was always yours." I drove home in a kind of silence I had never experienced before. Not the silence of sadness or confusion. The silence of something enormous settling into place. My grandfather had never told me. Not once. He had just kept going to work, kept putting the money away, kept writing my name in that account, week after week and year after year, without ever saying a word about it. When I got home, my father was in the living room. I stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked up from the television. I thought about telling him. For a split second, I actually considered it. But then I remembered the sound he had made when he looked at the passbook. That short, dismissive laugh. "This is a joke." And I thought about my grandfather waking up before sunrise for 31 years and putting $5 away, $10 away, $20 away, every single month without fail, for me. I said nothing. I went to my room and called my grandfather's sister, my great-aunt Rosie, who was the only person in the family I fully trusted. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandfather talked about you all the time. He said you were the one who actually listened when he spoke." She paused. "He would be very pleased." I did not touch that money for a long time. I finished school. I used part of it for university, the first person in my immediate family to go. I was careful with it the way my grandfather had been careful with it, because it did not feel like mine to waste. It felt like 30 years of early mornings and quiet sacrifices and a love that never needed to announce itself. My father found out, eventually. These things always come out. He heard it from a cousin at a family gathering, 2 years after I had started university. He called me that night. His voice was different on the phone, careful in a way it had never been when I was living under his roof. He said he was glad things had worked out. He said my grandfather had always had a soft spot for me. He said if I ever needed any advice about managing money, he was there. I thanked him. I kept the call short. I hung up and sat in my small university apartment and looked at the ceiling for a while. I thought about a man who worked 31 years in a factory and never complained. Who drank his tea standing at the kitchen window every morning. Who wrote my name in an account 3 months after I was born and never stopped adding to it. Who put a passbook in an envelope and wrote, "You always listened," because that was all he needed to say. My father called it trash. My grandfather called it love. The difference between those two men taught me everything I needed to know about the kind of person I wanted to become. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is. I read every single one. And if someone in your life needs to hear this today, please send it to them. You never know whose life you might change with one simple share.